Think tank foundation for economic education based in Washington, D.C. Thank you both of us for joining us. Cody, I'll start with you. Your basic case for canceling some level of student debt.
Yeah, well, thank you for having me today. This issue has become, I think, one of the top priorities for Americans across the country, and I'm happy to echo their voices. Debt cancellation is a top priority for many reasons, but during the pandemic, first and foremost, we need a stimulus. We need something that can be immediately done to boost the economy. And we know that the president has the authority to cancel student debt immediately with executive action. And by doing so, it would add over $100 billion to the economy and add jobs to the economy. We need that now during the pandemic.
Brad, you've written in the National Review that you think that something like this would amount to a, quote, regressive tax. Explain how you think that is.
Yeah, so that's not my opinion. That's the finding of a University of Chicago study that found that student debt cancellation would give 6 times more benefit to the top 20% of income earners than it would to the bottom 20% of income earners. So student debt cancellation is often talked about as a progressive proposal, but it's actually a thinly veiled taxpayer-funded bailout for wealthy, educated, and relatively well-off people. Only about 1 in 3 adults over age 25 went to college. But when you force taxpayers to pay off their student debt, that includes the other two-thirds of adults who never went to college. So you're redistributing resources to a relatively well-off slice of society.
Cody HOUNANIAN, what about that argument that it's regressive in that it affects higher earners because they're the ones that tend to have college degrees or advanced degrees and thus student debt?
Well, I think that research is pretty flawed, and I say that because for every person who never had to take out student loans because they are wealthy, because they are in positions of privilege, they're not well represented in this data. When we look at the population of who has student loan debt, yes, there is a significant portion that's white and has a higher income, but there's also the many communities of color impacted by predatory for-profit colleges, all the people who could not complete and have poor job prospects. We know that debt cancellation is something that would be beneficial for those communities as well. And let's not forget that debt cancellation helps our entire economy. And we know polls recently have showed that a majority of voters, even those who never had student loans, even those who paid back their student loans, support canceling student loan debt because they just know it's wrong. It's fundamentally immoral that our system crushes students with debt.
Brad Polumbo, what about that? Hundreds of thousands of students out there that do have some level of debt, and perhaps it does strangle their own personal finances. Would there not be some kind of economic stimulus to canceling some level of student debt?
No, there wouldn't be, and that's because debt is paid back over decades. So spending 1.5 or more trillion in dollars right now to create 100 billion in economic growth is not a good trade-off. Every dollar spent somewhere has to be taken from somewhere else. The government can't create money out of thin air. Well, they can create money, but not resources. And so even the nonpartisan Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget found that student debt relief is not effective economic stimulus. So when we're talking about this issue as a form of economic stimulus, we're totally missing the plot. That's 1.5 trillion that could come from somewhere else.
Cody HOUNANIAN, the president campaigned on $10,000 of student debt cancellation. Democrats now are calling for $50,000. Is there a difference in the level here? Is there a level that you prefer?
Yeah, as an organization that represents over 2 million Americans impacted by student loan debt, we are fighting for broad-based debt cancellation. That means the most amount of relief for the most amount of people. But of the proposals on the table, $50,000 is the one that we are standing by, and over 1 million of our supporters are standing by through petition signatures and actions. And that is because that would provide debt relief for over 80% of people with student loan debt, completely erase it. But, I have to go back to Brad's point about spending $1 trillion on $100 billion in stimulus. That's just not correct. The money spent on student loans is already out the door. What we're talking about is not receiving payments on student loans.
But taxpayers have to pay off the money.
it would take several decades for that to reach over $1 trillion.
And we should mention that not a lot of federal government spending these days is accounted for. I mean, it's just debt and the Fed printing more money. But go ahead.
Both of those things have real economic costs.
No doubt about it.
Yeah, and I just think the idea that canceling student loan debt means that the government is literally paying off people's loans as if they're writing a check to a bank. That's not how it works. That's a misunderstanding of the system, and I think it's a really important detail to point out.
Brad Polumbo, do you personally have student debt? And despite the economic numbers that you mentioned, do you sympathize with people that might be over their head in debt?
Look, there are some people that I sympathize with in odd examples, but by and large, I mean, the idea that this is a crisis is overblown. The median monthly student loan payment is between $200 and $300. If you aren't able to pay that with a college degree, it's because you made a mistake somewhere along the line. Maybe you chose to study French poetry or gender studies instead of accounting or business or STEM. But you know what? That's your decision. And passing on the consequences of that decision to other people is what's fundamentally immoral. I do not have student debt because I chose an affordable college, graduated a year early, and worked nights from my first day on campus as a security guard to avoid that debt. And to take other people's debt and other people's decisions who maybe chose to go to an expensive private school and take 5 years to graduate, well, to make me pay for that, that is what is fundamentally immoral.
All right, CODY, I want you to respond to that. I mean, is it partially the responsibility of the individual that took out that debt and the choices that they made?
Absolutely. People who borrow to pay for college, they know the responsibility they're taking on. But as someone who actually has student loan debt, went to a public university, and worked my way through college, I lived this experience, and I also talk to borrowers every single day. And the reality is that paying back this debt is extremely problematic when you talk about compounding interest. You talk about a broken student loan system. You talk about for-profit predatory colleges and student loan servicing companies that today we're on the Hill getting grilled by senators on both sides of the aisle. I'm quoting a GOP senator today who said, if our best and brightest can't get it, then something's wrong. That is the reality of the system today. That is why it's a crisis. And it's not just about payments. It's about not being able to purchase a home, start a family, or start a business.
We know this debate is going to go on, but we have to leave it there for now. Our thanks to CODY, HOUNANIAN, and Brad Polumbo. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks
for having us.
And when Avelino Maldonado started his spice distribution company La Criolla in Chicago in 1957, the biggest waves